At the end of the 1910s in London, Mary Bevan received the title of the ugliest woman on the planet. What caused the change in her appearance? This is what she looked like. So make yourselves comfortable, dear ones, because this is scary. The story of Mary Ann Bevan is incredible and interesting. She was born on December 20th, 1874 in a suburb of London, in an ordinary working-class family. At that time, her last name was Webster. She was one of 8 children in her family. They lived in poverty with limited ambitions. In general, there was barely enough money to feed everyone. Still, Mary remembered her childhood as a happy one. At that time, she was not much different, well, at least physically not much different, from her peers with whom she played on the street. All of that changed much later. The girl always liked helping people, so when she grew up, she decided to take up a more than noble profession, to become a nurse. Well, first she had to study for it. By the way, in England in the second half of the 19th century, the nursing profession was very popular, not least because of the work of Mrs. Florence Nightingale and the reforms she introduced at the time. Did you know that she was in Ukraine during the Crimean War in 1854? I didn't know either, but now both you and I know. At the end of the 19th century, Mary Webster completed her studies. In the early 20th century, she began working as a practicing nurse at a hospital in London. Luckily, her photos from that time have survived. Have a look. I think she looks great in them. Even attractive, I'd say. Actually, it was noted not only by me but also by the vegetable seller named Thomas Bevan. Mary had a passionate romance with him, which soon turned into a wedding in a small church where Mary Webster ceased to exist and Mrs. Bevan was born. This occurred around 1902, but the precise wedding date is unknown. In any case, Mary was happy, Thomas was happy, and everything was fine. But, as often happens in this interesting thing called life, not for long. About 4 years later, when she was around 32 years old, the woman started to feel strangely. She suffered from constant headaches, aching knees, and deteriorating vision. At first, she blamed it all on being overworked because even though she continued working at the hospital, she also had all the housework and a small child to take care of. But unfortunately, it wasn't just overwork, it was acromegaly. Okay, Siri, please tell me in my friend Miriam's voice what acromegaly is so I don't have to pretend I know what it is.
Acromegaly is a disease that manifests as a pathological, disproportionate growth of skeletal bones, cartilage, and soft tissues, as well as disturbances in various types of metabolism. In most cases, the cause of the disease is a benign tumor that develops on the pituitary gland. The patient may experience an increase in the size of the hands, feet, nose, ears, and tongue. Facial features become coarser, the teeth spread apart, creating gaps between them. There is a remodeling and growth of the frontal bones, an increase in the lower jaw, its deformation, which is accompanied by bite disorders. According to the order of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, under number 778, acromegaly is considered a rare disease. In Ukraine, on average, 30 cases are recorded per 1 million inhabitants. However, the number of undiagnosed patients with acromegaly is significantly higher.
Today there are effective methods for treating this disease, both symptomatic, which are aimed at slowing its progression, and radical, such as, for example, removal of a pituitary adenoma through the nose. But the thing is, back in the 1910s, very little was known about this disease, and even less was known about how to treat it. Even if treatment had existed then, Mary Bevan could not afford it. The disease progressed slowly. So this isn't a story where one morning a woman woke up as a different person. At first, her legs began to swell, then her hands grew larger, and eventually changes appeared on her face as well. The changes persisted for years, and her family noticed the initial signs before she did. It's always more noticeable from the outside, you know. But nobody did anything about it because, as I already said, there was simply nothing to do. Around 1910, Mary Bevan, to put it mildly, was asked to leave her job. Because she wasn't really associated with health, which is what the clinic's patients were interested in. Mary had a hard time coping with the changes in her body and went out less and less. She tried several times to get a job at another clinic, but after being rejected, she gave up trying. In any case, her husband said that everything would be fine and that he would be able to provide for the whole family. He truly loved her. You know, truly, by the way, the family, despite Mrs. Bevan's illness, was rapidly growing. Soon she gave birth to a second child, then a third, and before long a fourth.
Let me remind you that Mary herself grew up in a large family with 8 children.
So, who knows, maybe the Bevan couple wouldn't have stopped at 4. But we will never know this because of the sudden death of Mr. Bevan in 1914. What caused his death is unknown. But it is known that after it, Mary had a very, very hard time. Besides the fact that she and her children were emotionally devastated by his loss, it was also a heavy blow to the family's financial situation. The woman had not worked for several years, and during that time her appearance kept changing more and more as the illness continued to slowly deform her body every day. You see, dear ones, at the beginning of the 20th century it was extremely difficult for women to earn money, and she needed quite a lot to support 4 children on her own. And with Mary Bevan's appearance it was even harder. She simply couldn't get a job anywhere. Back then nobody had heard of body shaming, but it was practiced all the time. Mary tried to get a job anywhere she could, but aside from some temporary gigs that barely paid for anything, she couldn't find anything. But one day, in the local newspaper, she accidentally saw an ad from a certain Mr. Claude Bartram. This man was the European agent for the American Circus, Barnum and Bailey, and he was looking for the most hideous woman on the planet for them. Well, actually, that's what the ad was about. If you are the ugliest woman on the planet, please send us your photo and we might offer you a job. Although, if you believe sources like Wikipedia, it wasn't a newspaper ad, but rather a contest for the ugliest woman, which Bevan won. Well, Mary didn't really have many options, so she decided to send her photo to Bartram. And when he saw it, he immediately got in touch with her and offered her a job. Mary's task was to appear in public together with other people who also had a certain peculiarity. Dwarfism, gigantism, hirsutism, etc. It was really cringe, but back then it was considered normal, and people gladly paid money to see people at such freak shows, especially in the United States of America. As payment, the mayor was offered £10 a week during her first year working at the circus, plus a percentage from the sale of flyers with her image. With this money, she could not only feed all her children but also pay for their education. So, without thinking too long, she agreed, hoping to get at least some benefit from her illness. Of course, it was stressful. Very much so. The appearance that the woman had wanted to hide for many years now had to be constantly put on display. In most cases, it was in front of not very pleasant people, but Mary held on. For the first year, she worked in the English branch of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. However, Sam Hemparts, a popular showman of the time, noticed her and offered her a job in the United States of America. There, according to the man, real success awaited Mary. So, in 1920, she decided to take the offer and move to New York, where she performed in the Land of Dreams show on Coney Island at the popular Ringling Brothers Circus. Ringling. Well, in New York, Bevan really quickly gained popularity and even appeared in Time magazine. Again, she was not presented there as a person who faced incredible hardships and somehow managed to get through it all, but simply as a popular freak, the ugliest woman on the planet. For this photo shoot, they even specially dressed her in men's clothing to emphasize her brutal appearance. But at least it brought some results. It is known that by 1923 she had earned at least £20,000 in the United States of America. Taking inflation into account, today that would be about £1 million. Mary continued to work and earn more. But information about her future income has not been preserved, or perhaps she kept it hidden. When you hear £1 million, you think about the 100 Bayraktars you could buy for our army. The link is in the description for the fundraiser, but still, we shouldn't forget what the mayor had to go through to earn this money. I mean, not only illnesses, not only her physical ones, but also her mental challenges. Imagine thousands came to see her, pointed fingers, said, "Ga, look how scary she is," and even used her to scare children. But despite everything, she always smiled at her audience. In 1925, she returned to Europe to take part in several shows in Paris. For a while, she even planned to stay there, like forever. But eventually, she finally moved to New York with her children. Mary made sure all her children had a decent education and a childhood where they didn't have to worry about whether they'd have something to eat tomorrow. In 1927, she met a doctor named Harvey Cushing, who is now called the father of modern neurosurgery and a pioneer of brain surgery. He really wanted to help Mary, But unfortunately, even he couldn't. Then he contacted Time magazine, writing them a letter in which he said that they were, well, to put it mildly, engaged in an unworthy act, turning Bevan's illness tragedy into some kind of joke. In general, the man was deeply moved by Mary's story and became a true friend to her. He was probably the first person in many years who saw an ordinary human being behind her appearance. I wish there had been more people like that in Mrs. Bevan's life, but there weren't. She often thought about how her life had turned out, and in her last years she drank a lot. She achieved success, fame, and even money, but it was nothing like what she had dreamed of when she said yes in that small London church many years ago. On December 25th, 1933, Mary Ann Bevan celebrated her last Christmas and peacefully passed away on December 26th at the age of 59. So, is Mary Ann Bevan the ugliest woman on the planet? No, I think this is the ugliest woman on the planet, or at least one of them. And Mary Ann Bevan was one of the best, one of the most wonderful. A person who, despite everything, did not lose her humanity, kindness, and did everything for her children. The real monster could more likely be found among her audience, of whom there were many. That is what is truly frightening in this story. Dear ones, if you watch this video all the way to this very second, know that you are the best. Subscribe to the channel, my Telegram, and my Instagram. I will be very grateful. And I'll see you next week. In the meantime, you can watch this video or this video. That's all from Sasha on the Blogmaster channel. Please give a like. Thank you.